Welcome to Lighthouse, the podcast where we shine a light on the stories that remind us we're never truly alone in our experiences. I'm your host, and each episode we bring you real stories from real people who faced moments that changed them forever. Some stories serve as warnings, others as reminders of resilience, but all of them connect us through our shared humanity. Today we have several guests joining us to share their experiences, stories that might make you think twice about the world around you, but also help you navigate it with a bit more awareness. Remember, we share these stories not to frighten, but to illuminate. Let's begin with our first guest who experienced something troubling while camping. Please tell us your story.
When my cousin Cody and I were in our early 20s, we went on a handful of camping trips around Colorado. This happened when I was 22 and he was 23 in Arapahoe Forest. It was my first time camping there, not Cody's. We went in the middle of the week. Our jobs allowed us to have days off midweek, and we'd often go camping then to avoid traffic and crowds. I always let Cody take charge on these trips. He's the Eagle Scout, not me. We parked by a picnic area and hiked about 15 minutes deeper into the woods until we found a good spot to set up camp. A clearing big enough for 2 tents, the portable stove, and a campfire. We unpacked, set up our tents. Cody's always been quicker than me at pitching a tent. Created a ring of stones for a fire and gathered wood. As the sun was setting, we had the fire going, and Cody was grilling steak and burgers. He always went all out with food on these trips, and he's a really good cook. We had our bear spray just in case, though Cody always said black bears were unlikely. He'd say the real thing you have to worry about in the middle of the woods is other people. As we ate, we cracked open some beers and played classic rock on the speaker. If you've never been camping, you don't understand how good the vibe is in the wilderness with a friend. Some beers, reminiscing about good times. When it got dark, we started playing card games on this little folding table we brought. We were playing Uno when we heard something in the woods. I paused the music on my phone so the speaker would go silent. We clearly heard a person humming and footsteps beyond the trees in the pitch blackness of the forest. Cody urged me to find the flashlight, but by the time I found it, the sounds had faded away. I asked Cody if that was something to be concerned about, and he said it was definitely unusual for someone to be this deep in the woods, let alone creepily walking by a campsite with an active campfire, humming loudly. We went back to playing cards with the music much lower. When we least expected it, a big stick landed in the middle of our campsite. It didn't fall from a tree. This thing was thrown at us by someone. Cody started yelling something like, "Whoever's out there messing with us, get a life." Then footsteps could be heard walking away from us in the distance. I wanted to pack up camp and move somewhere else, but Cody said absolutely not in the dark. We both had bear spray, and he advised me to keep it next to me in my tent while sleeping. We kept hearing sounds like tree branches cracking in the distance. Sounds no animal would make. Someone was out there, maybe multiple people. We had to sleep eventually, so we agreed to take turns staying up to keep watch. Cody took first watch and said he'd stay up reading while I slept. I woke up in the middle of the night. I was still groggy when I looked up and saw a head peering into my tent. I thought it was Cody waking me for my turn to keep watch. I said, "Cody, is it my turn?" The head disappeared and I heard the tent zipper quickly close. I suddenly had a moment of clarity. I sat upright and listened as footsteps walked away. "Cody?" I called. He didn't answer. I unzipped my tent and saw the campfire was dead. Cody wasn't out there. I went to his tent, unzipped it, and found him fast asleep. I got chills all over my body. I started shaking him awake and told him someone was at the campsite. When he finally woke up, he grabbed his bear spray and said he must have dozed off while reading. He said I should sleep in his tent, but I needed my sleeping bag. He stood watch as I ran to get it, and that's when I heard that humming again from outside. Cody whispered for me to hurry up. I asked if he heard it too, and he said yes. We both got back in his tent with our bear spray by our sides. I stayed up while Cody slept, and after 3 long, horrible hours, I woke him up and we switched. When Cody woke me again, it was almost dawn. There was enough light outside that we packed everything up and hiked back to the car. It's been 6 years since this happened. Cody has invited me camping a few times since then, but I've never been interested after this experience. People are just too scary. The sight of that person's head in the dark, just looking into my tent, It was straight out of a nightmare. I may never go camping again.
Thank you for sharing that experience with us. It's remarkable how vulnerable we can feel in the wilderness, especially when the danger isn't from wildlife, but from other people. The psychological impact of feeling watched, hunted even, in what should be a peaceful setting, it stays with you. And I think we all understand why you might be hesitant to camp again after that. Our next guest has a story about a family cabin that took an unsettling turn. Please go ahead.
In my late teenage years, I came into some money after my father committed suicide and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out wasn't covering the costs. The cabin was set to go on the market in less than a month. So for that month's time, it was just going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get away for a while and clear my head. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog Midnight, and headed up in my dad's car to the cabin. My first 2 days there were normal. I spent my days playing with Midnight in the snow and snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation, listening to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much set aside from occasionally heading out to hit the slopes. The cabin was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room, a side guest bedroom, and a small kitchen. Upstairs had another 2 rooms along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time was spent in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms and kept those doors shut. The 3rd day, it was snowing heavily, so I stayed in. That's when things started getting weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All other cabins were around a mile away, and we were surrounded mostly by forest and tall pine trees. Both neighboring cabins were empty. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow surrounding our cabin. The footprints were semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20-30 minutes. They led away from my cabin and disappeared toward the denser part of the trees. I thought maybe someone was staying in a nearby cabin that I hadn't noticed. That night, Midnight was lying on the bed with me when his ears perked up. He jumped off the bed and ran downstairs to the living room. After about 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs and started doing his doggy dance, the sign that he wanted to go outside. We went downstairs, but once outside, he didn't want to pee. He started pulling his leash, trying to drag me toward the dense part of the trees where the footprints had been earlier. He kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up toward the roof. When he realized I wasn't going to follow, he sat down and just stared into the darkness, which was unusual for him. About half an hour after we went back inside, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like footsteps walking on my roof. It was only about 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be pine cones falling, or a forest animal, but the steps seemed spaced apart like a man's stride. Midnight also heard the noise and ran to the balcony door. I decided to investigate, so I grabbed my coat, shoes, flashlight, and cigarettes, and went out onto the balcony. I searched the roof with my light, but there was nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I was smoking and staring at the stars when I saw it. In a tree about 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position between 2 branches. It looked really tall, like 8 or 9 feet, and skinny. It was squatting on one branch, with its freakishly long white arms extended above its head, holding onto the branch above, and its mouth was wide open with no expression. I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this. The thing didn't move. Midnight stood up behind me and started pacing and lightly barking. I put out my cigarette, debating whether to shine the light in the thing's direction. But something in my head screamed not to. I walked backward inside, pulling Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light toward the tree. But there was nothing there. Later that night, I heard light tapping at the screen door, like someone tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and didn't stop for nearly an hour. Midnight stared at the door, but wouldn't go near it. I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door, but I kept hearing my dad's voice telling me to stay in bed. I listened to my dad's voice and eventually passed out. The next morning, it didn't take me long to pack everything and get the hell out of there.
Thank you for sharing that chilling experience. What strikes me about your story is how our instincts often warn us when something isn't right. Your dog sensed it, you felt it, and even in that moment of fear, you felt your father's protective presence guiding you to stay safe. Sometimes the unexplained reminds us of connections we never truly lose. Our next guest has a story about an online marketplace transaction that went terribly wrong. Please share your experience with us.
I was searching Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace for a new phone. This was a long time ago, so it was like an iPhone 7 or something. Phones still had home buttons back then. I found this listing for a phone. Some generic-looking post. iPhone whatever for sale, new around $300. It was a really good deal for the time. The seller, whose name was Melvin, told me all the details I needed. It was factory unlocked, never opened, and he sent me a video of the sealed box. Said, "Oh." Melvin seemed nice and easy to talk to over text. I got his number and we discussed a pickup point. His location on the Facebook ad was much closer to me, but over text he said he was only there that morning and had gone about an hour north. I wasn't happy about this, but it was a really good deal that I didn't want to pass up. I asked several friends if they'd come with me on this adventure, really just trying to make the hour drive seem fun. My friend Martina agreed to come on the promise that I buy her food. Melvin sent me the address of a police precinct about an hour away, saying he only does deals in police precinct parking lots to avoid scams. I had no problem with this. In fact, it made me feel more confident. I picked up Martina around 8:30 at night, and off we went. When we got off the highway, we were in a very secluded, quiet area with wooded areas, occasional buildings, and houses, and then more woods. We arrived at the police precinct, but there was no one in the parking lot besides empty police cars. We drove around the building a couple times, but didn't see Melvin, who said he'd be in a black Altima. I called him, and he said he was having car trouble on the side of the road and asked if I could come to him. He sent his location. He was on the side of some random road with nothing but woods on either side. He asked me to help jump his car with his jumper cables. I reluctantly agreed. We'd driven an hour, and I didn't want it to be for nothing. Martina was shaking her head the whole time, insisting this was sketchy. I told her we'd just drive past the location and see what was up. As we approached, we saw a black car's headlights on the pitch-black road. As we got closer, I slowed down, and it was indeed a black car, but we couldn't see anyone inside or outside of it. It was a convenient place to break down a pitch-black road between two patches of woods. No streetlights, no other cars in sight, especially for someone expecting a buyer with cash. I drove right past. Immediately, Melvin started calling me over and over. I ignored every call. Then he texted, "I saw you just pass me. Why didn't you stop? Turn around." I ignored that too. Martina laughed it off and reminded me I owed her food, so we looked up the nearest diner. It was a quiet place where we were just about the only customers. The waitress had just taken our coffee order when a lone guy with his hood up entered and sat at the counter. He was wearing a navy blue, dirty-looking hoodie. He glanced at us, then looked straight ahead, ordering coffee from the woman behind the counter. The man kept glancing at our table every minute or so. I whispered to Martina that it might be Melvin. When the woman handed him his coffee, he said, "Thank you, darling," and I recognized his voice from the phone. It was Melvin. I told Martina we needed to leave immediately. I waved the server over and whispered, asking for the check. As we were leaving, Martina said, "Oh my God, he's getting up." I looked and saw the guy heading toward the door as quickly as possible. We got in my car and sped away. Yes, we noticed a black car in the parking lot that could have been the one we saw on the side of the road. I was driving too fast for him to catch up, but after a while I got a low tire pressure light. I knew instantly he had slashed my tire. The PSI was dropping fast, so I pulled to the side of the highway and replaced the tire with a spare, which took about 15 minutes. The whole thing was a disaster, and yes, I still got Martina dinner that night. Now Martina and I look at it as a crazy story we can tell people, but it's absolutely horrifying how close we were to walking into a trap.
Thank you for sharing that experience. What's particularly striking is how your instincts and Martina's hesitation potentially saved you both from a dangerous situation. It's a powerful reminder to trust that inner voice when something doesn't feel right, even when the rational part of our brain tries to talk us out of our concerns. I'm glad you both made it out safely despite the slashed tire. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come from the closest calls. Our next guest has a story about a high school reunion that took a mysterious turn. Please share your experience.
I was seeing this girl named Phoebe for a few weeks. We'd been on 2 dates after matching on a dating app. She was 4 years older than me. Our first date was drinks. And for our second date, we went out with my friends on a weekend. My friends had neutral opinions about her. They thought she was nice and kind of quiet, though they'd later reveal their actual thoughts. Phoebe invited me to an upcoming high school reunion party. She said she didn't want to go alone, and after she'd come to hang out with my friends, I felt like I owed her. The reunion was on a random Saturday in the fall. It wasn't organized by her school, though. She told me it was hosted by some rich guy from her class at his house. We arrived at this fancy house with a gated driveway, but surprisingly, there were no fancy cars in sight. The moment we stepped inside, I felt like everyone was staring at me. People came up to Phoebe, hugged her hello, then shifted their attention to me. I felt like I was being interrogated with really personal questions about my life, my job, who I lived with. There was something off about the people there. They seemed older than 28, which was the age Phoebe told me she was. Some looked well into their 30s. When I mentioned this to Phoebe, she said, "Yeah, some of these people aren't aging too well." I asked if she remembered all these people, and she said yes. I was curious to meet the host, the owner of this big house, but she said she hadn't seen him yet. Throughout the event, I felt like everybody was giving me strange looks. I told Phoebe, and she said it was probably because they were wondering who I was. The whole atmosphere was weird. There was no music, and everyone was dressed strangely, not like normal 28-year-olds. I was increasingly uncomfortable, so I told Phoebe I needed to use the bathroom. Really, I just wanted to explore the house and get away from the awkward room. Anyone I passed stared at me. I found the bathroom, locked myself inside, and texted my friends about how weird the reunion was, wondering how I could convince Phoebe to leave early. Phoebe texted asking where I was. I replied that I was in the bathroom and followed up with, "This party is really weird. I'm down to leave soon." She just asked why. I responded that everyone was being weird. Then someone knocked on the bathroom door. I quickly washed my hands and left. The guy waiting outside, who looked like one of the younger attendees, said in a very low voice, "You should leave. That girl isn't who she says she is." I froze, then asked, "Phoebe?" He replied, "Whatever she told you her name is." He asked what she'd told me about the party, and when I said it was a high school reunion, he smirked and said, "Do these people look like they're going to a high school reunion?" Then he added, "Trust me, leave sooner than later," before entering the bathroom. Without drawing attention, I walked straight to the front door, feeling people staring as I left. I got in my car and drove home. Phoebe texted asking where I went, but I didn't answer. When I got home, I looked up her number on White Pages. That number wasn't associated with anyone named Phoebe. The name that came up was Claire Foster. The address where I'd picked her up was also different from what was listed on White Pages, which made me realize I'd never actually seen her leave a house. She was always waiting on the sidewalk. I finally replied, "I had to leave, I'm sorry," and blocked her number. My friends later admitted they thought she was weird from the start, but didn't want to make me feel bad. One friend joked that it sounded like I was in the movie Get Out. Everyone has theories about what was happening. Some people even thought I was exaggerating until I told them about the fake name, the guy telling me to leave, and the overall strangeness of the situation.
Thank you for sharing that unsettling experience. What's fascinating about your story is how our instincts often detect something wrong before our conscious mind can articulate it. That feeling of something being off is our brain processing subtle inconsistencies. I'm glad you listened to that warning from the stranger and made your exit when you did. Sometimes the most alarming experiences are the ones where we never get full answers about what was actually happening. Our next guest has a childhood experience that still haunts them today. Please share your story with us.
This happened when I was a young child, maybe around 8 years old. My parents had me late. My 2 older siblings are both at least 10 years older than me. I was woken up in the middle of the night by a commotion downstairs. It was my parents. I cracked my door open and heard them freaking out about something. I went to the stairway and stood at the top calling, "Mom? Dad?" My mom came to the bottom of the stairs and told me to go back to bed. I listened without asking questions, but I could tell they were stressed. I was trying to go back to sleep when I heard the front door slam shut, followed by silence. I presumed they left the house, though I wasn't sure why. I woke up again to sounds downstairs, the front door closing and footsteps, but no talking. I naturally assumed they were back home and just being quiet so they wouldn't wake me. I heard occasional steps and thuds from downstairs, drawers and cabinets being opened and closed, and I thought I heard the fridge opening too. I thought it was my older brother Chris, who was 10 years older and already driving at the time. Him getting home at 2 a.m. and rummaging through the fridge wasn't abnormal. These were all logical explanations I was telling myself. Eventually, I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, getting louder until they reached my door. My door quietly and slowly opened. I didn't sit up or move. I just had my eyes open facing the door as I lay there. There weren't any lights on, so all I saw was a dark shape at my doorway resembling someone's head. I said every name, Chris, Mom, Dad, then just asked, "Who's there?" They didn't reply, they just closed the door, leaving me confused and creeped out. I heard footsteps going downstairs. I was convinced it was my dad checking on me, though I wasn't sure why he was ignoring me. After not hearing anything from downstairs for a while, curiosity got the better of me, and I went down in the dark. I kept all the lights off as I approached the kitchen, then froze at the doorway when I noticed a tall figure standing in the middle of the room. I said, "Dad?" assuming it was him based on the person's size. A deep voice said, "Go back upstairs." I ran back up to my room, closed the door, and jumped under the covers. I was wondering why my dad's voice sounded so strange. The reality of a stranger being in our house didn't occur to my innocent mind. Not until later, when I heard the front door opening and my parents' voices, did I realize something was wrong. I went to the top of the stairs again, and they were shocked to see I was still awake. I asked what happened, and they said Chris had a little accident, but would be fine. I found out months later that he had gotten into a car accident while driving impaired. My parents had received a call from the hospital and rushed to see him, leaving me asleep at home. When I asked my dad if he had come into my room earlier, that's when I learned they had been gone for hours. My mom started freaking out because my dad had forgotten to lock the door when they rushed out. Me telling them about the person at my bedroom door and in the kitchen caused my dad to search the house with his gun while my mom called the police. The last thing I remember is being asked by a police officer to give my account. My parents felt terrible having to explain to the cops that they'd left me alone with the door unlocked. As far as I know, nothing of value was stolen. Whoever broke in clearly didn't have intentions of harming me. But having a complete stranger in your house is terrifying, especially when you're only 8 years old.
Thank you for sharing that frightening childhood experience. What's particularly striking is how, as a child, you tried to make sense of the situation with explanations that felt safe and familiar. The mind often protects us that way. It's fortunate that whoever entered your home that night didn't intend harm, but the psychological impact of such an invasion of safety can last a lifetime. Your story reminds us how vulnerable we can be in moments we least expect, and how important it is to take basic safety precautions, even in urgent situations. Our next guest has a disturbing experience from working as a caregiver. Please share your story with us.
I once worked as a direct care aide for a 65-year-old woman with a developmental disability. Her daughter, who was in her 40s, worked overnights and needed a caretaker with medical experience to watch her mother. When I say once worked, I mean I literally worked just one night, and you're about to hear why I never went back. The 65-year-old woman's name was Martha. Her daughter's name was Colleen. Colleen left for work earlier that day while I was coming from my first job, so I was already exhausted. Colleen had introduced Martha and me. Martha had given me a smile before Colleen brought her upstairs to her bedroom for the night, around 9 p.m. Colleen warned that Martha would sometimes walk around the house at night acting confused, and I'd need to calm her down and bring her back to her room. She specifically said this wasn't sleepwalking but a symptom of her mother's dementia. I assured her I knew how to handle it. I spent my time initially in the living room watching TV. These jobs aren't glamorous. It's a lot of sitting around. At one point, I heard footsteps upstairs. So I went to the stairway and called Martha's name, asking if she needed anything. She didn't answer. I heard her footsteps go back to her room, and then her door closed. About an hour later, I went to grab my sandwich from the fridge. As I left the kitchen with my plate, I nearly had a heart attack when I saw Martha standing at the doorway. I dropped the plate, shattering glass everywhere. Martha started yelling, "Who are you?" I reminded her who I was, her direct care worker there to make sure she was okay. She kept screaming, "I don't know you." I reminded her we'd just met and that her daughter Colleen had hired me. This calmed her enough for me to get her back upstairs to her room. I brought her water and melatonin, made sure she took both, and went back downstairs. After a few hours, I was exhausted. There was a spare bedroom upstairs where Colleen said I could rest if needed. At this point, I figured Martha was asleep from the melatonin. I fell asleep quickly but woke up about an hour later to a repeated slamming sound from downstairs, every 1-2 seconds. I jumped out of bed. I'd left the door open to hear if Martha got up, and carefully went to investigate. At the bottom of the stairs, I peered into the kitchen and saw a scene like from a horror movie. Martha in the darkness, repeatedly opening and slamming shut the oven door. I could only see her silhouette in the dark kitchen. I called out, "Martha." She stopped, turned toward me, shut the oven door one final time, and started walking my way. In a softer, scared voice, I asked, "Are you okay?" As she got closer, I could see her facial features. She looked at me with a blank expression, then walked right past me and up the stairs. I followed her, but as soon as she reached her room, she slammed the door. I knocked, asking if she was all right, but got no response. When I peeked inside, I saw Martha standing at the side of her bed, facing the wall, unsettling behavior straight out of a horror movie. I gently eased her into bed, covered her, said goodnight, and shut her door. I went back to the spare room and tried to stay awake for at least half an hour, just in case, but fell asleep quickly. I woke up again later. The room was still pitch black, and my alarm hadn't gone off yet. I looked around, wondering what had woken me, when I noticed the closet door cracked open and a shadowy head peeking out. I nearly had another heart attack. I called out, "Martha," multiple times, until she pushed the door open and slowly approached the bed, repeating, "Who are you?" "I don't know you." I reached for the lamp and fumbled until it turned on. Martha was holding a huge kitchen knife. Everything changed in that moment. Martha was now a threat to my life. I screamed, "Martha, put the knife down." My screams seemed to stress her out because she got closer, still repeating, "I don't know you." I wasn't going to attempt to calm down a knife-wielding dementia patient. I mapped out an escape route, jumping off the far side of the bed as she swung the knife through the air. A slow, weak swipe, but it showed she intended to use it. I ran downstairs, grabbed my shoes, and went outside. Instead of calling 911, I called Colleen as she had requested for any issues. She yelled at me not to leave, and I yelled back that her mother had tried to kill me. Colleen had to leave work. I waited outside until she returned. When Colleen went inside, Martha was back in bed asleep. Colleen accused me of exaggerating until she found the knife next to Martha's bed. To avoid giving her more reason to blame me, I didn't mention that I'd gone to sleep, though I didn't feel I'd done anything wrong. She'd offered me that room to sleep in. I never worked in that house again. Martha was a scarier patient than I'd ever dealt with in my 9 years as a direct care aide.
Thank you for sharing that harrowing experience. Your story highlights the complex challenges of caring for people with dementia, as well as the real dangers caregivers can face. What's particularly striking is how quickly a seemingly routine night shift transformed into a life-threatening situation. It's a reminder that caregiving, especially for those with cognitive impairments, requires proper training, safety protocols, and support systems. I'm glad you made it through that night safely and were able to recognize when a situation was beyond what you could safely manage. Our next guest has a story about a roommate situation that took a dangerous turn. Please share your experience with us.
When I was 23, I had to move out of state for work. I still work with the same company, but I've been able to move back to my hometown. At the time, though, I needed somewhere to live that wouldn't be bank-breaking. I posted on all the websites for a roommate: Facebook, Craigslist, Twitter, and even my neighborhood subreddit. A guy named Rob reached out on Facebook stating he had a room available. I looked at his pictures to see if he looked normal, and he did. I was open to having a male roommate as long as they seemed normal, even though my parents were very against it. Rob and I FaceTimed, during which he gave me a virtual tour of the place. He owned it outright. a modest house in the middle of town, only a 10-minute drive from where my office would be. He seemed nice, and I didn't get any bad vibes. His price and rules were fair, and the room was available immediately, which was perfect. A week later, I moved in. Rob met me outside, greeted me, and handed me a key. The first thing I noticed was that he was really short, about eye level with me. He helped me bring in some of my bigger bags and showed me to my room, which was already furnished. He said a friend had been living there and recently moved out. I replaced all the pillows and bed sheets with my own, of course. The next day was Sunday, and Rob offered to drive me around town. I wasn't eager to, but agreed just to start off on a good foot. He showed me the shopping centers and restaurants, but then he offered to get us lunch. I wasn't hungry, and he was suggesting a sit-down lunch, almost like a date. I didn't want him to get the wrong idea. I just needed a room. I politely declined, saying I wasn't hungry. He immediately suggested we grab drinks somewhere instead. I shot that down too, saying I don't drink on work nights. He became pushy, saying, "Come on, just a couple drinks." I maintained my politeness but stood firm. He suddenly went quiet, like he was upset. I was slightly uncomfortable, but focused on adjusting to my new job that week. A few days in, I did laundry and noticed my hamper of clothes seemed moved. The clothes weren't how I remembered leaving them. When loading the washing machine, I realized a pair of my underwear was missing. I checked my room thoroughly at least 5 times. It was gone. I had a disturbing thought. What if Rob took it? I didn't want to believe that yet, and there was no way I was going to confront him about it. Still, I wished there was a lock on the bedroom door. That weekend, I bought a lockable doorknob from Ace Hardware and swapped it out while Rob wasn't home. He didn't come home that night, but at about 1:30 a.m., I woke to banging on my bedroom door. It was Rob calling my name, and he didn't sound happy. I pretended to be asleep. I was honestly scared to open the door. The next morning, I woke to texts from Rob saying, "We need to talk. Be home after work." I replied, "Is this about the doorknob?" And he said yes. I apologized and said I was planning to tell him. He replied that it comes off today. His tone was nasty and weird. I thought about my response and asked if he could sympathize with me, a woman who just feels safer having privacy in her room. He responded a little nicer, but still insisted the old doorknob be put back on. I was confused and upset, but had to respect his rules. I changed it back the next day. What bothered me was how he knew I'd changed it. It's not like the old doorknob was sitting out in the open. The idea that he tried coming into my room that night scared me. Things went really downhill after that. One day when Rob wasn't home, there was a knock at the door. It was a girl around my age who asked if I was living there with Rob. When I said yes, she warned me to get out immediately, saying Rob had multiple restraining orders against him from different girls and was known to be a dangerous, creepy stalker. I was speechless. I asked how she knew I was there, and she said she knew he was trying to rent his room and wasn't surprised he'd opted for a female tenant. She said she saw me moving in and waited until he wasn't home to warn me. She offered to help in any way she could and gave me her number before leaving. I immediately started packing and looking for other places. I found a studio apartment sublet across town for a bit more money, and the person said I could move in as soon as possible. I texted Rob that I'd be moving out the next day due to a family emergency, and he didn't answer right away. When he got home about an hour later, he asked about my text. I gave him my best fake story, and he said he'd give me my money back tomorrow after going to the bank. I was relieved, but about an hour later, he knocked on my door and asked, "Did by some chance some girl say something to you?" I denied it, saying, "No, what do you mean?" He said, "Never mind. It just seems like you're running away for another reason." I insisted it was just family reasons. Sadly, the story didn't end there. I woke up that night and screamed when I saw a dark figure sitting on the end of my bed. It was Rob. He put his hand over my mouth and whispered. I pleaded, "Please don't hurt me," and he responded, "Why would I hurt you? I know someone said something to you. Don't believe what these girls say." What happened next was just as insane. He started caressing my leg right after I said he was scaring me. I got out of the bed and ran for the door while he screamed at me to stop. I ran outside with my phone and called the police, hiding in the bushes until they arrived. I explained everything to them. They made Rob come outside and give his side. I just wanted to get my stuff and leave, so the police stayed while I collected my belongings. I also insisted Rob pay me back while the officers were there, which he did. One officer pulled me aside to tell me that Rob had been arrested before for incidents with women, but since Rob denied coming in my room or touching me, it was he said, she said. I left and went straight to a hotel for the night, then moved into the studio apartment the next day. I have never and will never live with another man who's not my boyfriend or husband or just anyone I don't know, ever again.
Thank you for sharing that terrifying experience. Your story highlights the importance of trusting our instincts and taking warning signs seriously. What's particularly troubling is how predatory individuals can present themselves as completely normal and helpful, only to reveal their true nature once they have someone vulnerable in their space. I'm grateful that woman took the risk to warn you and that you acted on that warning before things escalated even further. Stories like yours remind us all to prioritize safety over politeness or convenience. Our next guest has a story about an encounter with a stranger that could have ended very differently. Please share your experience with us.
I was home alone one night when I was 15 or 16 years old. My entire family was gone, though I don't remember why. I was a big gamer at the time, obsessed with StarCraft, and would sometimes spend weekend nights playing on my computer in my bedroom on the first floor. The doorbell rang twice, and I hurried to answer it, not wanting to be away from my game too long. When I got to the front door, I asked, "Who is it?" as I always would when home alone. A soft, weak voice on the other side said something I couldn't hear. It sounded like a woman. I opened the door with the storm door still separating me from this older woman standing on the other side with a big smile on her face. She had her hands behind her back. I asked if I could help her, and she said she needed to use a phone and asked if she could come inside. Since I was little, I was taught never to let a stranger into the house, including women. I felt awkward turning her away, so I redirected her to the library a few blocks down, saying they'd surely have a phone. I knew the library was probably closed at that hour, but I was just trying to get this stranger to leave. She was still smiling, but what she said next didn't match her smile. "That's very rude to turn away an old lady asking for help." I replied that my parents don't allow strangers in the house. It's a rule. As I slowly closed the door, apologizing, she just stood there, still smiling. Though her smile never changed, it suddenly felt much more menacing. I was walking back to my room when the doorbell rang again. There was no way I was opening the door again. That woman gave off weird vibes. I went back to my game, but not long after, I heard something tapping on my window. It was a clinking metal sound. The window was right in front of my desk, but I had the blinds down so I couldn't see what was making the noise. My room was the only one with a light on in the house. The terrifying thought that it might be that old woman tapping on my window made me turn off my computer sound. I didn't care about my game anymore. The clinking on the window persisted, so I left for a different room in the house. I sat in the darkness of the living room when the doorbell rang again. This woman was harassing me now. I tried to convince myself she wasn't a threat, just some confused old lady. When she rang the doorbell a second and third time, I decided to open the door and ask if there was someone I could call for her. But when I opened the door, there was now a man on the other side, about 10 years younger than the woman. He said through the storm door, "Have you seen my mother?" I said yes. She had come to my door earlier. He apologized and explained she had dementia and had wandered out of the house. I suddenly felt bad, but then he asked if he could come in for a minute. Again, I felt awkward, but told him we could talk through the door. I mentioned I thought she went into my backyard because I heard something at my window. He thanked me and said he'd go check around back. I went to the back window, expecting to see him searching, but saw nobody, not him or his mother. This was all too weird. I went to bed early that night, falling asleep with the TV on in the background until I heard that clinking sound on my window again. Remembering the concerned man, I decided to try and help. I lifted the blind up with my hand and saw that same woman outside my window with that creepy smile, tapping a kitchen knife on the glass. I closed the blind and crawled back into bed, terrified. A suspiciously short time later, the doorbell rang about 4 times, and the clinking on the window stopped. This felt like some kind of robbery attempt. I stayed in bed, ignoring the doorbell, and waited until it finally stopped. The next morning, I told my dad what happened. He said I was smart not to open the door. Everyone agreed it sounded like an attempted robbery. Maybe that woman really did have dementia and the man was her concerned son. But it all seemed too coordinated. Why did he want to come inside too? How did he know she came to my house specifically? Why didn't he go into the backyard to look for her when I gave him permission? Too many unanswered questions that make me believe I avoided something terrible.
Thank you for sharing that chilling experience. Your story is a powerful reminder of how our safety instincts can protect us, even when social conditioning tries to override them. That feeling of obligation to help an elderly person is something many of us would feel, but you were right to maintain your boundaries. What's particularly disturbing is the coordination between these two people and how they attempted to use vulnerability and concern as weapons. I'm glad you trusted your instincts and kept that door between you and potential danger. Our next guest has a childhood experience that could have ended very differently. Please, share your story with us.
This happened so long ago that some details are blurry, but I'll share what I remember most clearly. It was the last day of school when I was in 4th grade. The last year in our elementary school, where kids had to be picked up by their parents. 5th graders were allowed to walk home on their own. My mom would usually pick me up, but on this last day of school, my friend Dennis and I had a playdate planned to celebrate. Dennis wasn't in my class that year, but we'd been friends since kindergarten. He was in a different dismissal hallway. After school, we lined up and walked to the exit door at the end of the hall where we waited outside with our teacher, Miss Blue. I was waiting for Dennis's dad to appear from the crowd of parents in the parking lot when I heard someone call, "Tommy, Tommy!" I looked over and saw a man waving as he approached. He introduced himself as Dennis's uncle and said he was picking me up. I went to Miss Blue and said I was being picked up. She asked, "Where is he, sweetie?" And I pointed to Dennis's uncle, who waved at Miss Blue. She dismissed me, and I went with the man. He led me through the crowd, talking quickly and nervously with a slight stutter. He was walking incredibly fast, making it hard for me to keep up with my backpack. He explained that Dennis's dad was working later than expected, so he was driving me. We got to his car, a dark red hatchback, and it wasn't until then that I realized, where was Dennis? Why weren't we picking him up too? The man turned to look at me in the back seat and said Dennis was already at his house. I was shy around adults, but I didn't know. I wasn't one to speak my mind when confused. But I was very confused. This was making less and less sense. The whole drive, the man kept talking, telling stories about his elementary school days, and asking what sports I played and what we were learning in class. We drove for about 10 minutes, which was a long time in our town where houses were close together. My house was just a 5-minute walk from school, and we were definitely in an unfamiliar area. When he parked in front of his house, which looked normal from the outside, he led me inside and locked the door behind us. It was incredibly dark inside, all the curtains were shut. The only light came from a dim lamp in the corner, making it feel like nighttime. He looked at me and smiled. I asked, "Where's Dennis?" He started acting jittery and nervous, saying something like, "Oh, I think he's downstairs playing video games. Give me a second. Wait here." Then he disappeared into a nearby room. I heard a door open and footsteps descending into a basement. My heart was racing. I knew I was in danger. I tried to quietly open the front door, but couldn't. It had a lock that needed a key. I was really panicking, though I still held out a little hope that Dennis might come up those stairs, but I knew the chances were slim. I regretted entering that house and did the only thing I could think of. I went to the kitchen, found a phone, hung on the wall, and dialed 911. When they answered, I whispered, "Please come to this house. I've been kidnapped." They acknowledged me, but I didn't say another word. I hid the phone under a towel in the corner with 911 still on the line, and hurried back to where the man had left me, as I already heard footsteps coming back upstairs. He called my name saying, "Come down, Dennis is down here." When I didn't answer, he came up and asked if I was okay. I felt sick and scared, hating myself for walking into this situation. In a frightened voice, I asked if I could leave, and I remember the change in his face. His friendly smile disappeared as he realized I wasn't falling for this anymore. He walked closer in a gentle manner, until he was close enough to grab my wrist aggressively. He started pulling me toward the basement, and I screamed and cried. He yelled, "I'll let you go if you stop and behave," so I listened. I went down the stairs, and halfway down, the door slammed behind me, and I heard it lock. At the bottom was an empty, unfinished basement with a concrete floor and one support beam in the middle. There was a depressing yellow glow from a single exposed light bulb hanging from the ceiling. Exactly the kind of place you'd imagine kidnapped children might be taken. I could hear his heavy footsteps upstairs. You could hear everything in this house. After a while, he came to the basement door, opened it, and called down asking if I was hungry. I said no, not wanting him to go into the kitchen and find the missing phone. He shut and locked the door again. I sat there waiting, my heart in my throat, until I heard the doorbell ringing 3 times, followed by banging. Clearly police at the door. I refrained from screaming until I heard the front door open, but the man's footsteps never approached the door. The doorbell kept ringing, and the banging continued for some time until there was a really loud bang followed by multiple heavy footsteps and shouting voices. I started screaming for help as loudly as I could, banging on the basement door. The door was unlocked, and a police officer grabbed me and rushed me outside. There were at least 3 police cars outside. I had to tell everything to 2 officers as we waited for my parents. The man was brought outside in handcuffs and put in a police car. That was the last time I ever saw him. When my parents arrived, my mom was crying hysterically. There had already been a scene at the school as police were called, and Dennis's dad realized what had happened. This man was a work associate of Dennis's father, who somehow learned Dennis's dad would be picking up Dennis and me on the last day of school. He seized the opportunity to do what he did. I don't know how he found out what I looked like. As I got older, I never asked for more details, because I try not to think about it. My mom took me to counseling for months after this incident. If I hadn't thought to call the police before he put me in that basement, I know I'd be dead now. This was about 17 years ago. That man might be out of prison for all I know.
Thank you for sharing such a profoundly disturbing experience from your childhood. Your quick thinking in that moment of extreme danger very likely saved your life. What's particularly troubling about your story is how this predator exploited systems designed to protect children, using familiarity, authority, and the trust of school officials to gain access to you. It's a stark reminder of why verification protocols at schools are so critical. The combination of your instincts and bravery in the face of such terror is remarkable, especially for someone so young. I hope sharing this experience, however difficult, helps others recognize the importance of teaching children about safety without frightening them. Our final guest tonight has an experience that touches on something many of us wonder about. Please share your story with us.
It was New Year's Eve of 2020, and all of us were ready for this horrible year to be over. My friend Logan was throwing a house party. I arrived early to help set things up and secured a spot to sleep in his parents' room so I could drink without worrying about driving home. His parents weren't home for the night. Most of our close friends came, plus a bunch of Logan's friends I didn't know. The party was fun. At midnight, everyone cheered Happy New Year and clinked their drinks. After that, people slowly started leaving for other parties, bars, or home. The later it got, the more it became just the closer friends staying behind, until it turned into a chill drinking session in the living room. This went on late into the night. By around 3 a.m., everyone who wasn't sleeping at Logan's had left. As it quieted down, we started hearing an occasional sound. At first, we didn't know what it was, but soon it started to sound like creaking. We initially dismissed it as a sound from the fridge, or some other house appliances often make weird noises. It was just Logan, me, and Cody at this point. Cody was already falling asleep on the couch. We were ready to go to sleep, but the noise bothered us so much that we had to investigate. We went to the kitchen, but the sound wasn't coming from there. When we got near the basement door, we realized it was coming from downstairs. Logan opened the door, and we heard the creaking more clearly. I said, "Go check what it is," but he kept saying, "No way." Then he called down, "Yo, who's down there?" The creaking stopped, and we never heard it again. After waiting at the top of the stairs for a solid minute, we agreed to go down together. We both grabbed knives, which in our drunken state seemed like a good idea, though in reality, we were so drunk we'd probably only hurt ourselves. At the bottom of the stairs, we searched the entire basement. It wasn't huge, just a couch, TV, a bar, a table in the corner, and various old pieces of junk. It was pretty messy. First, we searched for anyone who might be hiding, then tried to figure out what could have made that sound. I noticed a rocking chair, so I sat in it and started rocking. It made the exact same creaking sound we'd been hearing. Logan and I looked at each other. I stood up, and so did every hair on my body. We ran up those stairs and slammed the door shut faster than we'd ever moved before. We tried to come up with logical explanations, but there were none. Logan kept the basement door locked for days until his parents returned. There was no living soul down there, but something was moving that rocking chair. It used to belong to his grandma, who had passed away long ago. His mom kept it for sentimental reasons. I can't say I've ever experienced anything resembling the paranormal before this, or since then. It still sends chills down my spine.
Thank you for sharing that unsettling experience. What makes your story particularly compelling is how it happened in such an ordinary setting, just friends hanging out after a party, when something inexplicable occurred. Whether we believe in the paranormal or not, there are moments that defy easy explanation and remind us of the mysteries that still exist in our world. That image of an empty rocking chair moving on its own is particularly haunting because of its connection to Logan's grandmother, as if something of her presence remained with an object that held meaning for her in life. Thank you to all our guests tonight for having the courage to share their stories with us. Each experience, though unsettling in its own way, shines a light on different aspects of what it means to be human. Our vulnerability, our instincts, our resilience, and sometimes our encounters with things we can't fully explain. The lighthouse doesn't just warn of dangers, it guides us safely through darkness, helping us navigate uncertain waters. In sharing these stories, I hope we've not only highlighted potential dangers that exist in our world, but also illuminated the strength of the human spirit to survive, learn, and grow from even our most frightening experiences. Until next time, I'm your host, and you've been listening to Lighthouse. Stay safe out there, and remember, you're never truly alone in your experiences. Someone somewhere has weathered a similar storm.